In the geopolitical world, there's probably when you think of energy, there's nothing bigger than LNG and how it affects flows of energy, energy security. It's been such a huge thing in the last few years. So this is a great next panel discussion on LNG and related. We're lucky to have Jill Evanko. She's the president and CEO of Chart. What you'll hear about Chart is they make many of the things that make LNG and management of gases and fluids and things like that possible. So she has a window on everything from gas to hydrogen. And then we're also super lucky to have Corey Grindal. First of all, he's a Longhorn. He's got the orange tie going. But he's the COO of Cheniere. And, you know, Cheniere is the company, if you had to pick one company globally that has visibility on where the cargo is coming from, where the cargo is going to, where are we going to have more facilities, what are the issues, what are the opportunities, it's Cheniere. So thank you guys for joining us.
Real pleasure to be here.
Well, maybe I might start with you, Corey, just to talk a little bit about inside Cheniere, what it's been like over the last 3, 4, 5 years. You know, just before COVID to just an incredible rush of business around Ukraine and Europe and all of those problems to today. I know we have 43 minutes. I just asked you a 39-minute question. But seriously, give us a snapshot of life at Cheniere. The company's doing really well. The world needs the company to do what it's doing, but just give us a quick sense of your views of the world.
Can I go back a little further?
You may.
I mean, you think about the LNG business in the United States, we've only been sending out LNG for 9 years. This is our 9th year. I've been with Cheniere 12 years, and when I started, we had a couple contracts. The process was brand new. When I say the process, I'm talking about the permitting process. LNG, the technology to make LNG has been around since really the 1960s and the 1970s. But the process was just starting to happen at the first part of the last decade. So when you talk about what's the last couple years been like, I would say really the last 10, 15 years has been this massive change where Cheniere started off as a regas company. We owned 2 regas facilities. We sold one, Freeport, to Michael Smith, who's now made it also an export facility. But just this massive change with the U.S. where we were supply short, to where when the shale revolution really came in mass in natural gas in 2008 and 2009, now we are one of the largest suppliers of natural gas for the world. So when you talk about the last couple of years, when we got into 2018, 2019, we started our first train in 2016. Throughout 2019, we brought on about 4 or 5 trains. 4 at our Sabine facility, and then 2 at Corpus. And Freeport is coming online. There's another facility, Cameron LNG, that was coming online in 2008, 2019. And there was this massive wave of LNG, and the demand wasn't really quite there yet. And then you had COVID, which, you know, as we all have lived through, really shut down the world. And then, so prices were lower. And in fact, 2020, we had some of our customers actually cancel cargoes. One of the things that the United States and Cheniere has done is given our customers the flexibility to take the LNG, and if they don't need it, they still pay us a reservation fee, but they have the right to give it back to us, and we will go either sell it to somebody else, or we'll go sell the gas back in the domestic grid. So we were seeing that in 2020. And then come the first part of 2022, I think everybody's aware that you had the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And Russia was the primary natural gas supplier to Europe, where they were supplying about 15 BCF a day. And by the time the middle of 2022 came around, they were only flowing about 2.5 BCF a day. So LNG became the supply source for Europe really throughout 2022 and 2023. I was actually in London managing our international trading business, And I've been trading for 20 plus years. I have never had my stomach hurt as much then, just because of the massive amount of volatility and these extremely high prices.
So just while we have you, and just so people have a sense of it, the LNG business is such a capital intensive, this is an expensive game. Give us the crowd just plus or minus what does an LNG facility cost, and plus or minus what is just one cargo. I know it depends on gas price, but plus or minus what is one cargo worth, just so people have a sense of the dollars and the risk that are involved.
That is a great statement. So let's do that. We are building 10 million tons. There's about 410 million tons of export capacity located around the world. We currently operate 45. We're building another 10. That 10 million tons costs about $7 billion. And that will depend on commodity prices and labor prices, which are in flux. So that's what it costs to build one of these facilities. When you look at what Cheniere has invested, we've invested over $45 billion in all our facilities. The regas, our existing 9 trains, and then this expansion that we're building down in Corpus Christi, Texas. Right now, LNG cargo delivered to Europe is about $12 an MMBTU. So $12 in your normal size ship, and they come in different ranges, is about 3.5 TBTU. So for those of you who are really good at math, that's a little over $40 million for one tanker of LNG, which is about 3.5 BCF is kind of the way, if you want to equate BCF and TBTU, so I don't confuse anybody.
Awesome. Yeah, someday we'll have to get you. Give us a chart for, BCM, metric tons. Everybody can leave just doing it in their head like you do. Jill, from your perspective, I mentioned Chart is doing so many things that are critical to the LNG industry. How do you see LNG? What excites you about it as a provider to it? How does it fit in with your strategy? Just big picture, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who don't know, Chart Industries, we're a publicly traded company, and we provide gas to liquid solutions. So the actual process technology that liquefies the molecule, regardless of molecule, all the way through to the mission critical equipment that goes into these applications. So think heat exchangers, fans, storage tanks, trailers, regas terminals, all the way through to compression. So we see a variety of different options, answers, and ideas in terms of the energy landscape and the energy transition. And the number one that we see is LNG. It's the most active. It's the one energy source that is a step toward cleaner and greener, but as well as the fact that there's existing infrastructure. You just heard Corey talk about math works, economics work. There's exporting, there's importing, and all of that. So what we've seen over the last few years is really multiple different kind of, I would say, cycles, even though it's different than traditional oil cycles. And that relates to some of the macroeconomic factors that Corey just described. But when we saw earlier this year the LNG pause come into play, a lot of discussion around what does that do in terms of the United States from an export perspective. And in our business, what we saw was an immediate uptick from international providers, people that were going to fill that need and that gap. And so we've seen kind of, if it's not coming from here, it's going to come from somewhere else. And that's been an interesting factor this year. In addition to that, what we've seen in the LNG landscape, and Cheniere is certainly the leader in this, is the move from baseload to modularity, which essentially gives you the more optionality, faster returns in many cases, more than nameplate capacity output, efficiencies, and all of that, which is really what has to continue to happen to continue to have LNG be a leader, be cost competitive, and then also give these guys who have existing facilities the ability to continue to gain optimization and efficiency. So that's really where we spend a lot of our time on our process technology as well as on our equipment, is to be able to optimize brownfield as well as give new options for those developing greenfield exports.
So Jill, I was wondering if we were at your board meeting we'll be presumptuous. We're all at your board meeting. Your worst nightmare, we're all at your board meeting.
You guys are all welcome to help me out on that.
But and you're talking about the long-term trends. It seemed like what you were saying there is you're a, you didn't say this exactly, but you're a believer in natural gas as an answer. Therefore, natural gas that's liquefied and put on a boat is an answer. And you just see that as a very resilient trend over the next 10 years to be tied to. Does it also mean that when it comes to, regardless of wherever Corey is selling a ship full, whatever price he's selling it for, you're a little bit less, you're less tied to that. So you're a little bit agnostic to the volatility we might see because you think the trend is so solid. Is that the way you would think of it?
That's correct, right? So he has a very different business model than we have as essentially a manufacturer of equipment. But in order for both of our models to work, we have to partner up to make sure that the cost is effective and the efficiencies and they're getting what they need. I mean, listen, we're 5 to 7% of the cost of what he's building in total. But if our 5 to 7% doesn't work, there's no LNG coming out. So that's super mission critical. And I'd also come back to the discussion in terms of, you summarized it perfectly, by the way.
Oh, good.
Yeah, that
I'll
was
stop now.
That's exactly right. But we've lived through. If we would go back to May of 2020, the beginning of COVID, everybody all of a sudden was interested in hydrogen, and we've been doing hydrogen 160 years, and nobody gave a crap for 156 of those years. Like, I mean, so it was a thing. It was a thing for space, basically. And then all of a sudden, that became very interesting. And as a provider of this equipment, we're like, all right, that's great because that's going to give us more business. And you should have seen the stupid ideas coming across because people were just going from where we are today to this perfect end game, which nobody was ever going to rip out all existing infrastructure and replace it with green hydrogen infrastructure. And so, we lived through seeing kind of these different ideas come into play, but the one that has been super consistent across the last 8 years in our business is LNG. And now we've kind of come a little bit more into pragmatism in terms of what do the next few decades look like, and natural gas is certainly going to have to be a part of it.
Maybe I could ask you both on this one, because Corey, you mentioned LNG has been around for a long time. The U.S. is ramping of late, and the world's demand is ramping, but the technology and the product has been around for a long time. Do you see potential for technological change in the LNG business? Are there some interesting things happening that could make it even better?
So I'm going to start my answer with, Jill and I know each other very well. We are good friends. She is one of our largest suppliers of equipment. And I'm going to give you an example of what we have done in the last year together. So going to Maynard's point, when we built our very first set of trains, we had to do it right. And we used technology that's been around. Conoco Phillips developed what's called the Cascade technology in Kenai, Alaska, in the late 60s, and that was the very first U.S. export project, was Kenai, Alaska, up in Alaska. It's since been mothballed, but we used that technology because we had to do it right, because we sold these long-term contracts where we had a very serious commitment to deliver. So when you talk about technology, what we've done, this 10 million ton expansion that we're building down in Corpus, is kind of what Jill just talked about. Our first 9 trains are massive. They're 3.5 football fields long. They consume about 750 to 800 million a day, and they'll make 5 million tons a train. We're building, in that 10 million tons, 7 modular trains where we're using Jill's technology for the cold box, the way that it takes natural gas and gets it really cold. And just so you guys know, if you're an engineer in the room, natural gas is about 70 degrees normally in the world. To make LNG, you have to get it to 260 degrees below zero. So the heat exchangers and the cryogenic process is really what makes it, and that's what Jill's company does. So we've been using this newer technology on our new trains. But the example that I want to talk about is on our existing trains with some of this technology that's been around for a while. We have been able to debottleneck the technology that we have at these existing trains, some using some of Jill's technology for a company that she bought a couple years ago, where we have gone and retrofitted parts with new technology, and it has allowed us to where when Bechtel built our first couple trains, we thought that it would make about 4.2 to maybe 4.5 million tons. And we are now getting over 5 million tons per train with some of this technology that we've been able to employ. So, and some of it we started talking about in September of last year, and we have 2 trains worth fully outfitted with some of her new technology that we've been installing.
Okay, hold that thought, Joe, because Corey, one question. When those of us in the audience here, you know, the U.S., the LNG export number is like 15 BCF a day or
Yep.
some number like that. Is that a you're running flat out kind of number 24/7? Like that's not just the number, but it's our capacity?
So the total U.S. capacity right now is a little over 90 million tons. Us, Cameron LNG, Freeport LNG, there's a small facility that Kinder Morgan owns over in Georgia, and then Dominion sold to Berkshire Hathaway 1 train's worth of capacity of 5 million tons that's in Maryland. That's all the capacity that's in the U.S. There is, in Calcasieu Pass, I'm sorry, is still commissioning, but that's another 15 million tons, so it's a little over 100.
And now you got to help us. We got 90 million tons, and I threw out 15 BCF.
Yep.
Are those the same number?
They're same numbers.
Okay,
But
thank you.
tons, when we talk about LNG, I mean, I can talk about the U.S. until the cows come home, but when we talk about LNG, a little over 100 million tons, there is a doubling that's going to happen in the next 5 years between us and some other new facilities that are currently under construction. So the U.S. will have about 200 million tons of export capacity, and we anticipate that by 2040, the whole market will go from about 400 right now to about 700. And you're seeing the demand, of LNG as an enabler of energy reliability. That is what's happening in the world right now, especially with some of the geopolitics.
So this is some awesome stuff. Jill, let's don't get past this technology question while we're still around it. And Corey used the word modular. And it seems like if you talk about nuclear, if you talk about almost any manufacturing technology, somebody's going to use that word and imply you can stamp things out and make them cheaper, make them smaller, lower the cost. From a manufacturer, what are the interesting things happening around technology, whether it's LNG or otherwise?
Yeah, I'm going to stay on the LNG theme here. So the first is the technology that we offer for liquefaction. We call it IPSMR, Integrated Pre-Cooled Single Mixed Refrigerant. It was named by an engineer. And I've been with the company 8 years. It took me like 7 to learn what that meant. But
That was pretty good. Can you do it again?
no.
No, okay.
No. Ask me that after I have a glass of wine. It gets even better. But the interesting part about this is everything you just said is exactly right. You know, operators, they want to lower risk, they want to lower cost, and they want speed. And so all of those things are what modular really does. And when we talk about lowering risk, for example, we talk about brazed aluminum heat exchangers, cold boxes at the heart and soul of liquefaction. You can make those in our shop, and then they go to site, and so you require less laborers at site than a stick-built facility that's all being put together on the ground. So that's one example of a risk that this modular technology supports. Also, plot size is very important, right? So when you're talking about plot and Corey can describe why plot matters, but you have to be able to adapt the size of the boxes, the construction of it, has to fit with the permits, all of that. But if you're doing this in a way, you can actually reduce plot size required to get the same output. That's not necessarily the case in some of these 10 MTPAs, but in 1 or 2 MTPA, that's super important. We recently did a 1 MTPA actually offshore on a jackup rig. And it was the first of a kind, and that was something that was super unique and is getting above nameplate capacity in an environment that didn't require permitting. So creativity comes from modularity as well. But then ultimately, at the end of the day, this is about efficiency and cost. And so being able to have standards associated with modularity, build these things the same way, in the same shops, through the same lines, so that he knows it's going to work when it gets out in the field, and every single one of these, if it has a problem, causes the whole train to go down. So quality and consistency with standardization comes with modularity too.
Could we, Jill, because it's, so Corey is the big LNG business, if you will, big ships, big quantities, big receiving terminals, export terminals. You also see the smaller scale LNG business where people are trying to use it at a factory, on a jackup, et cetera. What would you say about that business, that technology? Is it growing? How big could that get? How do you see that business?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. Actually, is one that's very different than it was 4 years ago. What we would have said 4 years ago is it was really North American and utilities for peak shaving. It would have been the ones that were doing small-scale LNG, very little floating liquefaction. Most of what we see now is actually outside of the United States in small-scale or floating, and that these are typically a 1 MTPA, and they're going to serve a kind of a hub and spoke model in many cases. So if you're on the, take the east coast of Florida, that's going to serve island in the Caribbean, and that's really kind of an energy to power type of play. We are seeing a lot more of those now. We actually have 486 of them in our commercial pipeline, not yet booked, but opportunities to do so. So you're seeing more frequency and more iterations of the same customer building multiples on the small. But it's a different game. It's very different than what Corey's business is, and it's really a targeted, and it typically is going to be a single customer. And that's also a very different size and scale than what you're talking about building across 3 or 4 years to get to a 10 MTPA train. These typically get done in 16, 18 months. But again, they're not going to compete. They're really not competing with the larger scale.
What's the split of your business? Like how much is in the big project, big scale versus the smaller kind of niche applications?
Yeah, so if you looked at our business, we would say for hundreds of millions on the larger scale per project, and then on the small scale, kind of 20 to 40 million per project. So to get to an equivalent of a large scale project for us, we would need 6 or 7 small scale projects. On average, we get 6 or 7 a year in the small scale side. So they're different in terms of tenure and nature, but it depends on the year is the answer. But on par, the largers are larger for us, but small scale is not that far behind. It's just more volume.
So Corey, you referenced it. There's been a huge ramp, and then there's another big leap coming. As an LNG industry leader, how do you view all this capacity that's coming and what it means? There's some good news. I think if you're in Europe, it means your prices will probably be less. But if you're tied to some of the economics, does that mean, we've got too much? Like, how do you think about all that supply that's coming?
So there's a whole lot of companies that will model what prices are going to be. It is my personal view, and this is my personal view, so I'm just going to state it that way. There is so much demand in the world at the right commodity price that I don't see it being this tsunami that just wipes out pricing. I think that people realize that, one, we have to get off coal around the world. I mean, if you look at 2023, coal was 31% of all the energy consumption around the world. We've got to get off coal, and that's primarily in Asia, a little bit in Europe, and the United States has done a really good job, for the most part, starting to get off coal. The second thing is you're starting to see, there were, in the last 5 years, I think I've got this number right, there were 1.5 billion people that went from abject poverty to what we would call the middle class, where they have phones, and they have electricity, and they have a refrigerator. There's still 2 billion people left to go. And if you look in the future, if we're at 8 billion people alive today, forecasts are we'll be at 10 by 2050. That inherent demand has got to be fed from an energy perspective from somewhere. And natural gas is fungible, right? You can take it anywhere in the world on a ship. So that's going to continue to be part of the demand. But I think that what you're really seeing, and there's a whole lot of you in here that are really focused on AI and data centers and the continual ramp of technology. You've got to have a baseload source of generation in order to do that. And that's going to be done in the United States, but it's also going to be done around the world in large LNG consuming countries like Korea and Japan and China. They're only going to continue to increase. And the thing that makes me say,
I'm going to grab you right there,
Yep.
Ross. There was our moment. We've got a chart that shows what China's going to do in LNG that the KBH team prepared, and I think it'd be, since you just mentioned it, Corey, it'd be a great time to pull it up.
well, there's the forward curves of pricing, so you can see that kind of $12,
Yeah, let's
$13.
tick through these real quick. Okay, so here's pricing. You had the blowout associated with.
And that's why my
Ukraine.
stomach hurts so bad.
That's the stomach hurt stuff.
Here,
Right
just to
in
put
there.
things in perspective, when I say that it's a little over $40 million for a cargo, one cargo was over $300 million. So when you talk about credit, when you talk about risks of default of customers, these are real concerns at those kind of prices.
All right, and
But-
then let's just show the next two. Let's flip ahead. So there's your comment on the U.S. Now being the world's largest exporter, which, as you said, we're in our 9th year of doing this. So
That's right.
this is an amazing story.
And you can see that doubling that I'm talking about, that I was talking about earlier.
And we'll show you China. There we go.
There we go.
Is this, in your mind, is China the single biggest, most important, most growing market, or is that?
As a officer of the company, all my customers are important.
Right.
We have Chinese customers, we have Korean customers. I work for our investors, right? So we are an equal opportunity seller to all of our customers, and we make the same commitment to all of them.
Can I ask you? That was great. But if do you think that the projection is roughly? I mean, is this really what China could be doing? Of course, China, you could put up any flavor, and China is always, the chart looks like that.
Well, my answer is yes. And this is what there's two things that I'll say about this. One, China needs a lot of everything. They're going to be the largest nuclear generator here in the next 5 to 10 years. They're going to be probably the largest single LNG importer. They're developing their own domestic natural gas reserves. But they're still the world's largest coal burner, them in India. So there's a lot of opportunity, going back to my point number one about where demand is going to come from. There's a lot of coal that can switch over to natural gas, and I think China is going to do it.
So not to beat up on the China thing, but Eric Cantor's comments around China and politically where it's all headed. How do you think about this demand curve and the U.S. providing that, given some of this political backdrop we've got?
So, that's a tricky question. I hate politics. I'm an engineer by
You would have helped come up with that name that Jill had earlier.
I
Can
would
you
have.
say it?
It was probably my design project when I was here. But so we have about 10% of our total export capacity sold to Chinese customers. And we deliver, as I said, we're an equal opportunity deliverer. We deliver to them. I can't say what's going to happen based on who is elected president, as Eric kind of alluded to as well. But we will stand ready to sell our term supplies to China that they have contracted for.
So one thing, Corey, before we leave sort of this global market, you had a trading background. You're the COO, but so that's highly operational. But trading is an important part of what the company does. This thing about we send a boat out on the water, and then we divert it to the place with the high, like this global management of meeting need, trading. Like, how does Cheniere manage the complexity of all that?
Good question. Can I answer one thing to talk about the demand part real quick?
Okay.
That 400 million tons is being developed right now. There is about 1,200 million tons of regas capacity. We say that 1,200 million tons of regas capacity going to over 2,000. So the world is serious about LNG and natural gas being one of the fuel sources for a long, long time, just based on the infrastructure that not only we're building to liquefy, but that customers are building to regas.
And I would add to that comment, just recently we actually have a green steel hydrogen customer in Europe, and we're going to build them an LNG regas terminal because the source of it is actually going to be natural gas. So that's, it's green steel with natural gas being imported through a regas terminal.
On this point about these 1,200 receiving terminals, if we had that,
1,200 million tons.
1,200 million tons, sorry. If we had a map that showed the proposed locations of those receiving terminals, would anything about that map surprise us, or is it in the usual places?
It's what I would call D, all the above. It's Europe, it's Asia, it's South America.
All right.
And maybe one in Australia, believe it or not, who is the third largest exporter of LNG in the world.
All right, think about that trading question for a minute, because
Okay.
it's complicated.
It is.
Jill, the receiving terminals. I think one thing around the LNG story that people are used to is they know the U.S. ramp, they know the U.S. provided the LNG. There's a great story there. They don't really realize that Europe built a lot of receiving capacity, and they did it fast. What would you say about that process, how they did that? Are you surprised? Because you don't think of Europe as being a nimble, industrial, get-her-done kind of place.
Yeah, what
That's a very Texas comment, I guess. I'm sorry.
I think it's fair. I mean,
Okay.
I think, and interestingly enough, right, that's exactly right. They did it very fast, and but what I would say is a little bit of it was under the radar. Like, we don't actually want to talk about LNG. We don't want to talk about regas. We want to
Just ignore that facility.
yeah. So don't
This
look
is
at,
not the facility you're looking
yes,
for.
look-
There's the
look-
engineering.
exactly, right. So it was really interesting because they were very nimble to do it, but didn't really want to point to that because obviously the general EU construct is we want to move past all of these things that are not considered fully green. But this happened very quickly, and there was plenty of financing behind it. And what it proved is that if you really, your back is against the wall. I mean, listen, I live in Texas. If I don't have air conditioning, I don't care how it gets fixed. I don't care what I need that answer. And that's really what you saw in Europe was these countries saying, I got to get some independence here, and the only way I'm going to do it if I control my own destiny. And it happened very quickly and very fast. And the other part that we saw was countries that were not around water, right? So landlocked countries that then had to partner up. And so we saw quite a bit of mobility applications come into play. That these guys said, okay, I have one pipeline. It's a Russian pipe. I really need some other options. And so we saw a lot around ISO containers, mobile regas darts that we call them, so that landlocked countries could get access to those who were building regas terminals. So it's possible. It happens. You don't always hear about it for all of the political reasons that are in play in Europe.
All right, so Corey, I don't want to go too far past the trading
That's
question
fine.
because it is fascinating to understand how all that works, how you manage that opportunity and risk.
So I'm going to go high level, and then I'll get to the details. Over 90% of everything that we produce, we have sold long-term to customers around the world. So when you look at what we're actually managing, my number one risk that I've got to do every day is I've got to make sure that we produce the LNG that we've committed to our long-term customers. If we can make that other 10%, it's actually more like 5% right now because we're so heavily contracted after the last couple of years. The remainder is what we take maintenance out of, and we have to do maintenance every year because we believe that our machines are going to run for 30, 40, 50 years, so we've got to maintain them. Everything that's left over is ours to go market. And so in 2022 and in 2023, we had some trains come on early before we had to start selling our long-term contracts to our customers. So how do we manage it? We manage it with some strip of medium and long-term sales, long-term being a couple years in the trading world. And then we price some day to day, and we follow traditional risk management where we know who our customers are. We're only going to sell so much to a certain company. We're only going to sell so much to certain regions of the world. And we're in continual dialogue with our customers about what they need. And so if you look at the last couple of years, you had Europe be the market of greatest need with everything going on with the Russian gas and some of what Jill was talking about, where customers were saying, hey, friend sitting right next to me, I need some of your natural gas. We've seen Asia start stepping up. So during 2022 and 2023, we saw the Chinese and other customers sell their long-term cargoes that we were selling them to people in Europe. Now we start seeing them take their long-term cargoes And so we manage it risk-wise about what the market is telling us, and we're in constant dialogue with our customers.
So you touched on something that's pretty interesting, I think, for those of us in the non-LNG world. It's interesting to try to understand, which is the Chinese, at least as I understand it, during the period of stress where your stomach was bothering you the most, they booked ahead a lot of LNG, and then they flipped out of it and sold it to the Europeans. How many cargoes sort of end up in the final destination of the original buyer? Is there a lot of secondary trading in cargoes, or they tend to go where planned?
I would say in 2022, the majority was going to other players. Now in today's world, and it's a fairly tight market.
Meaning trading intermediaries.
Yes.
Okay.
Intermediaries or other utilities, end users that they may have relationship, the original buyer may have relationships with. Today, I would say probably a majority of our customers are taking the LNG to their facilities and their countries, because the market is tight enough right now that when you look at Asian and European pricing, they're kind of right on top of each other. So you may see little snaps, a month here, a month there, where one price will be over the other. But for the most part, prices are relatively flat around the world when you take out the cost of shipping, because everybody kind of needs it right now. And we've seen prices as low as 7. I told you prices are about 12 right now going into winter. These prices are competitive with just about everything else out there, whether it be LPGs, coal, everything else. So people are taking their LNG, which is why they bought it from us.
Jill, I wanted to jump back to one comment you made before we lose the thread, which is you commented on hydrogen, and you're exposed to those types of applications. And I think it was 156 years of not much interest, and then a frenzy, and now it seems like we've gotten a little more sober on hydrogen. Like where are we in the hydrogen discussion? Are serious people pushing ahead, or what would you say where we are in that hype loop?
Yeah, so the first year of that hype loop, you guys can't even imagine some of the projects that were brought to us to try to do, and we'd say, well, that's completely illogical. You do not want to capture, offtake from your landfill and turn it into hydrogen using a microwave plasma reactor. You don't want to do that, right? But if you want to pay me to do that, that's fine. That kind of type of hype has calmed down, and what we really see now, we actually see pretty consistent business in hydrogen, but it's much more pragmatic and practical. A lot of it is not green. A lot of it is blue or gray, in particular. And
isn't that ironic that
yes.
the most viable hydrogen is now coming usually from natural gas applications?
Correct, right? And the interesting part is that you've got the folks that are moving most ahead with it are industrial gas majors. So these guys were folks that had been doing it for a long time. They're the leaders, and they have use of the molecule. There's still short supply of hydrogen around the world for those who want to use it. So production has been the number one area that we've seen building. So building similar style plants to the LNG side, but for hydrogen production, which is actually much more difficult to do than LNG. We do tend to be U.S.-centric, so there's a lot of discussion around the IRA and the 45V with respect to hydrogen, and I think that's holding some demand and production back. But outside of the United States, there's definitely a lot of activity happening in gaseous hydrogen, in particular in Europe, Japan, Korea primarily. And then I would say, I think the sobering of it is that it's going to be, my opinion, strictly, much less a total percent of what people thought from energy source than, in the next 30 years than what was being talked about 3 or 4 years ago. But it's also the only molecule that every single industry, every name brand company that you talk to actually talks about. So there is an element of peer pressure in hydrogen too that's happening a little bit as we look at data center customers and things like that. So we've got lots of data center customers that talk to us about, what's the right answer, and all of these work, but natural gas is the answer that can happen fast and is the cheapest option. Hydrogen right now is going between $20 and $28 a kilogram. So
So you mentioned the magic word, data center. It seems to be responsible for everything in life right now. Could you tell us just a little more, when you get involved in data center building or powering or just that part of your business, give us a sense of what you do for them and what some of the attitudes are in the data center world.
Yeah, so all of it really goes back to what Corey said earlier, which is all of this is driving increased need for energy. But specific to data centers, and one of the things that I'm so blessed with in our business is that we take an air-cooled heat exchanger, which was originally used in the oil field, is used in LNG, is used in hydrogen, and is also used for heat rejection in data center cooling. So what we're seeing is a lot of air cooler demand and fan demand. Use them interchangeably at that point. It's around alternative answers to the types of cooling that have been in play in data centers for the last decades. The reason for that is the size of the data centers and the speed that they're being done, but also where they're being located. Heat rejection works better than traditional solutions in cooler temperatures, but also if you don't have good access to water supply. So where some of these are being placed, in particular in the United States, is driving the decision of what solution to use.
Okay, so we only have a few minutes left. I'm just thinking about, Corey, you were a mechanical engineer at Texas, and Jill, I'm thinking about your business. This just seems, both of your companies, it just seems like a mechanical engineer's dream to go and do all this stuff. We got a lot of young people here. Is Mechie the way to go? Is it a great diversified basic engineering degree that gives you so much? What would you tell folks? Because if you're a Mechie, get these guys cards. But what would you tell the young people about that?
I'm just going to say, I don't think it's necessarily about Mechie. We use all E's. We need chemical engineers. We need mechanical engineers. We need civil engineers. The thing that I would say to students today is that I don't think that the media does the energy business right, because the U.S. energy business is going to change, but there is so much opportunity in your lifetime that I know that in some schools they have just kind of shunned the natural gas and oil businesses, but just energy as a whole, the world is going to continue to need it. It's going to continue to evolve, and that there is such opportunity. I would hope that this next generation of people coming out of school are excited about what's out there, because we've talked about technology today, we've talked about growing demand, and it's just, energy sources are going to come from everywhere, and there's just such opportunity out there.
Well, Jill, we've got to get your advice, but while you're on this comment, this latest Exxon forecast out to 2050 shows 100 million barrels a day demand in 2050. They're in the business of providing that, so, but I think it's an analytically rigorous estimate, and so that's, to your point, Corey, like, wow, we're going to need a lot of energy. But Jill, what would you tell the young people?
Yeah, I would have said the same thing in terms of we use all E's, so that's something that across the business, I mean, all the way through to electrical, chemical, and especially in our business where we're doing water treatment technology, carbon capture technology, and so on. So you can get a really broad sense of how energy plays across the spectrum in either of our businesses. But I think the important part is that what you think you're going to do coming out of school is probably not what you end up doing. And so that's something that I think getting an experience or set of experiences that helps you determine what it is that you really want to do, what applications do you love, what industries do you love, is my best advice. And so be really open-minded to the opportunities that come along. We are hiring. So please reach out if you're interested. But I think that's the best advice I can give is be open-minded, take experiences as they come. Don't be too rigid in your mindset of what it has to look like.
All right, so we're wrapping up. I can tell you the questions we got on the iPad here. There's two themes. One is the natural gas, the LNG ban, the permitting ban, and that feature of the landscape. The other one is the over-under on natural gas price in the next 5 years. So, Corey,
For domestic or international?
Domestic, U.S. price. We need the over-under next 5 years.
If I was going to play over/under, I am $3 at $4.50, because for most places across
You're saying 32450.
somewhere in there. I think, and
Okay, there's a
it's
lot
going
of
to
money
depend
in
on
there,
weather.
Corey. We got bets are going down.
I get it, but I'm going to give you my reason is
Okay.
depending on how much gas the United States needs for electrical generation, for AI, for all these things, industrial processes, because companies are coming back to the U.S., that is the price at which most producers can go drill and make a rate of return that will incentivize them to drill.
Can I ask you why? Does that mean when you referenced AI, when you think about the big variable in today's demand for natural gas, is it that AI? Is it U.S. usage? Is that your biggest variable?
It is. And just to clarify, when I say AI, I'm talking about natural gas-fired power generation. We are going to probably see what we saw in the late 90s and early 2000s about a massive fleet of natural gas-fired generation being built because you've got to have something to back up the intermittency of renewables. You've got to have base load if you're going to run one of these data centers. And they are economical, they are environmentally friendly, and they provide that backup power, and they can ramp up real quick, and they can ramp down fairly quickly as well. So that's why I keep saying AI. Translate when I say AI into natural gas-fired power generation.
Jill, any closing thoughts?
I think that in summary, what I would say is that there isn't going to be one answer to what's needed here. We know that there's going to be increasing energy demand throughout the coming decades. We know that the population around the world are growing, and much of that population does not currently have access to clean power or clean water. And so how do we practically solve this? And so a hybrid of solutions is going to be necessary, and LNG is a key part of that for all the reasons we talked about today.
Awesome. Corey, Jill, thank you so much. This was fantastic.
Thank you so much.